So you might have heard people sounding the alarm on social media over the recent release of a young adult novel titled Sibylline. Now, when I first heard about the book, the first thing that I thought of was, oh, that's the same author that wrote the books that the Descendants movie franchise is based on. And everything I found out about this book since then has been purely against my will. The first red flag started to show shortly after the book was released. As I was scrolling through threads, I realized that multiple people were bringing up concerns with this book, specifically the explicit open door scene that's at the end of it, which is already a major point of controversy considering the fact that this is a book meant for young adults. So already having an open door scene in this kind of book was a major point of contention, and a lot of people were rightfully concerned. But then it occurs to me that the scene in question isn't just open door. The scene in question actually involves the three main teenage characters. Then, the cherry on top, one of the characters involved in this scene is dead. Like an active corpse. So not only do we have explicit sexual content in a book meant for readers as young as 14, but it also contains necrophilia. At this point, I'm only hearing this from people on the internet. I have not read the book, I have not listened to the audiobook, I had not seen any pages from it. So I thought to myself, surely this is an exaggeration or a gross misinterpretation of the book. Because surely a book published under an imprint of Penguin Random House, one of the top publishers in the industry, would not put out a book like that. They would not put this material out into the world when it is so clearly inappropriate for its target demographic. Surely a book like this would then not also become a Good Morning America book club pick. So in light of this information, I decided to read the book for myself to see if there was any credibility to the allegations people were making on the internet. But I discovered that not only were all the statements people making online totally true, but they were actually holding back. Because yeah, there is an open door sex scene at the end of the book, but it's actually not the only one. So without further ado, hello. Welcome back. It is a new day, a new sleigh, and a new video where I have something to say. And today I will be talking about Sibylline, the book that I read so that you don't have to. First, of course, I will give you a brief summary about Sibylline. So you have your three main characters, Atticus, Raven, and Dorian, and they're magicians in, I'm gonna say like an urban fantasy setting where like the real world still exists, but there is a magical element to it. So they're getting ready to go to college and they all apply to this one special magic school called Sibylline. But when they all find out that they've been rejected from the school, they decide that they still have to find another way to get in. They decide that even if they can't attend Sibylline as students, the next best thing would be to enter as faculty members. So their grand plan is for the three of them to get jobs working at Sibylline so that they can infiltrate, eventually woo the professors there into letting them attend as actual students. So they each manage to get jobs on campus and they try sneaking into lectures and stealing books, all in an effort to learn how to use their magical abilities. But as they start sneaking around the campus grounds, they start uncovering more and more secrets about Sibylline. So they eventually discover something insidious is going down in Sibylline and they have to get to the bottom of it. Now, I'm going to note now, because I'm sure this will come up later on in the review, I mentioned earlier that the main characters are teenagers. Now, their age is never specified in the book as far as I could tell. I did not catch a specific age that they gave for any of these characters. I assumed that they're anywhere from like 17 to 19, but I know that they're teenagers because in the very first line of the summary, it says, 3 teens infiltrate the magical Ivy League. So they're definitely teenagers. Argue with the wall. That's the spoiler-free summary. If you don't want to know anything about the book, I suggest you click off the video now. But if you don't care about spoilers and you just want to hear me talk about this book, then feel free to continue. Before we can address the controversial elements of Sibylline, we first have to discuss the problems within the publishing industry itself. And yes, I'm talking about Romantasy. Now hold on for a second, because you might hear me say that and think, oh, Kristen is shitting on Romantasy. She's a misogynist. She hates book talk. That is not true. Now we all know that the genre itself is not to blame. Because of the popularity of Book Talk, Bookstagram, and BookTube, the Romantasy genre has completely taken over publishing. With the virality of books like ACOTAR and Fourth Wing, publishers are scrambling to push out as many Romantasy titles as they can. There is a clear interest in more mature and at times explicit material in reading, and as a result, publishers are investing more marketing dollars in books that cater to that content. Now again, that's not the genre's fault, nor is it the fault of readers that enjoy Romantasy. The problem is that the publishing industry's focus on Romantasy isn't just impacting adult books. It's trickling down to young adult and even children's literature. Let me explain. As a result of the demands for adult books, YA is now starting to skew towards a much more mature audience. Partly because they're trying to get as close as they can to the vibe of Romantasy, but also because a large portion of the demographic of people that consume YA books are actually adults. I mean, look at me. Most of my content is reviewing YA books, which, funny enough, the reason I'm finding out that I like YA so much is actually because it doesn't have this explicit material. It's coming to my attention that I kind of have an aversion to it, so knowing that the most I will get from a YA book is kissing is like actually really comforting for me. So yeah, this problem actually does concern me, and I do have a lot to say about it. We're also seeing that the characters within YA books are starting to get older and older. Protagonists are usually within the 17 to 18 range, and I've even started seeing 19 and 20. Like nowadays, I feel like I pick up a YA book and the protagonist is almost never even 15 or 16, which is normally like the sweet middle spot in YA where it's like, usually those characters appeal to all ages within that range, but now we're starting to move the slider a bit to the older end. So you have books that are about older characters with more mature content, and yet it's still supposed to appeal to 13 and 14-year-olds? You mean to tell me readers that are barely entering adolescence are supposed to relate to characters that are legal adults? Genres, age demographics, that's a whole other video that I can make, but for now, just know that there are changes happening within the YA space. And the problem just trickles down even further. Funny enough, I was recently listening to the Plot Twist podcast hosted by two authors, Victoria Aveyard and Soman Chinani, where Soman, the author of the School for Good and Evil series, actually discussed this very topic. He said that, as many of us know, there is a literacy crisis amongst young children. And part of that problem is because genres are starting to age up. There's a clear lack of options for the kids that are supposed to be transitioning into chapter books, namely the middle grade genre. Right now, there's not really any new major middle grade series that are enticing kids to read. Think about it. There's no current Percy Jackson. There's no current School for Good and Evil. I mean, guys, I'm trying, but what can I do with only 4 books? I mean, all I can do is encourage people to check out The Magical Morrisons, my debut middle grade series that tackles these hard topics and is challenging for young readers. Sorry, I know, shameless promo, but I had to throw it out there because I am trying. So young readers find themselves with a choice. Either they pick a book that's a bit on the younger side and doesn't challenge them, or they pick a book that's too mature and potentially inappropriate for their age. Whether it's the content that doesn't really resonate with them, or the book itself is simply too challenging and is outside of their reading level. And saying that these books might be too mature isn't an exaggeration, because on top of the age ranges shifting, the previous clear boundaries are starting to blur. For reference, I remember a time when cussing wasn't even a thing in YA books. Now, that's like the least controversial thing you could do. Now we have more of what's called the fade to black scenes, where you might see a character start to undress, or they're getting into like a hot, steamy makeout session. I'm sorry, I feel very uncomfortable saying that about teenagers. But the scene, quote unquote, fades to black, and you as the reader don't actually see anything happen. Which now brings us back to Sibylline. Up until this point, the boundary was pretty clear. There was one line you could not cross in YA. In theory, you could get as close as you wanted to topics about sex, as long as the reader never actually saw it happen. But now, that has changed. Now we talk about the scenes in question. I'm going to very briefly and very vaguely summarize them, because for my own comfort, I cannot go into detail. Again, we never really get a clear indication of how old these characters are supposed to be. At the start of the book, it sounds like they're graduating high school and transitioning into college. So the youngest age they could be while still being teenagers is 17.
That little girl is a child. I don't want to see you sniffing around her anymore this afternoon. Do you understand?
Yes,
Boy, have you lost your mind? Because I'll help you find it.
Realistically, I think we're shooting closer to the 18 to 19 range, but even then, I'm still wildly uncomfortable. But Kristen, you say, it's technically legal. Yeah, barely. That's the same rationale a 22-year-old frat guy, a senior in college, will use when he tries to initiate a relationship with a girl that has barely graduated high school. That's such a low hurdle to clear. You could have just made them older. Nothing would have changed if we had aged up these characters. Nothing. They could have taken a gap year. It could have taken them a while to get into Sibylline. They didn't need to be teenagers. But anyway, I'm getting off task. The first scene is between two of the characters, Raven and Atticus, in his apartment. It starts with a makeout session that eventually evolves into undressing, buttons popping, zippers being pulled down, and fondling of genitalia. These are teenagers that I'm talking about. The scene is cut off as Atticus remembers that he actually has a crush on their mutual friend Dorian, and Dorian has a crush on Raven, and he doesn't want to hurt his feelings, so he stops it. Forgot to mention, they're actually in a proper love triangle. The triangle is as follows. Raven has a crush on Atticus. Atticus has a crush on Dorian. Dorian has a crush on Raven. That's how it is at the start of the book. But eventually, as you will come to find out, they realize that they all like each other equally. In general, throughout Sibylline, there are a few steamy makeout sessions, I will say, which is still pretty typical for YA. Like, it's still within those boundaries and it's considered okay. I think it's a blurred line depending on how long the makeout session lasts and how far the hands travel. For example, in one makeout session between Dorian and Atticus, it does lean a bit more on the spicy side, as Atticus, quote, squeezes his Captain America ass. And then after he does that, he says that he gets hard. So there are some descriptions in these scenes. The next big scene is between Raven and Dorian, and I'm so sorry, but it genuinely makes me cackle. Like, I have no choice but to laugh, because the only other option is to fall to my knees in despair. This scene also takes place closer to the end of the book, and it's happening in between their good friend Atticus getting kidnapped and almost murdered. So basically, Dorian and Raven are at her apartment. So in between them making discoveries, realizing that they're in grave danger, and worrying about their friend Atticus, who hasn't been home in over a day, they realize that the sexual tension is actually crazy and decide to start making out. Then we flash over to Atticus's perspective. He is disheveled. He's in a manic state, wandering the grounds of Sibylline, when he eventually discovers that his mentor, the person that he looked up to for the majority of this book, is actually the villain. He is actively getting attacked by a monster. And then we cut the chapter and flash back to Dorian and Raven, and guess what? They're literally about to have sex. Clothes come off. The phrase, position myself at her entrance, is used. Like, they are genuinely about to get into it when Atticus telepathically sends them a distress signal. So they are delayed in helping Atticus, saving him because he's literally on the brink of death because they had to put their clothes back on. This had me laughing so genuinely. Like, if I was Atticus and I found out that while I was literally fighting for my life, my friends, the people that I love more than anything, were too busy getting cracked, I would question where their priorities are. Like, they knew he was missing. They knew they had some reason to worry about him. They knew people were getting killed on the campus of Sibylline, and they still thought it was a good time to do that? I'm laughing. But again, the terminology that is used in this scene is typically reserved for adult literature. Like, they use a lot of the same phrases and terminology for intimate acts that you might find in an adult book, but I really can't dwell on that right now because it gets worse. Let's talk about the necro scene. So for context, Atticus was captured by the villain of the story, Professor White. So to make an incredibly long story short, Professor White is trying to bring back this old witch from the dead so that she can learn creation magic or whatever. Evil villain plot stuff, right? So she uses magic to bring this girl, Adelina, back from the dead, and she puts her soul into Atticus's body. Raven and Dorian manage to exorcise Adelina from Atticus, but once the ritual is complete, Atticus is dead. Like, no, oh, I have a pulse, but it's faint. We have to get him help. No. He's gone. So Raven and Dorian are both upset, naturally. Their best friend, the person that they're now both realizing they love, is dead. But they decide that they can't give up on him yet. They have to find a way to bring him back to life. And what is this magic cure, you ask? How do these magicians manage to cheat death itself? They fuck Atticus back to life. No, I am not joking. The chapter when the event happens is in Atticus's perspective. It starts like very dreamlike. Atticus is slowly coming from the other side back to the land of the living. He is not fully conscious, and I do want to outline that he is not really aware of what's happening. As he is crawling his way back to the land of the living, he notes that he feels the sensation of his clothes being taken off. He feels a breast in his mouth and someone touching his genitalia. And eventually he comes out of it. He comes back to life fully, and they all have sex with each other. Even though Atticus's dialogue during this encounter is still very dreamlike, there's no denying what's happening here. They are having sex. All those details are kept very explicit for the reader so that there's no confusion. So that is the big scene that everyone is talking about on the internet. And while most people are in agreement that this is horrifying, there are a select few of people that think that the rest of us are pearl clutchers. Let me read the thread for you. Let me read it. Now, for context, this original post was made in 2025, but the original poster did bring it back up with the Sibylline Controversy. They said, quote, "Y'all need to sit with the fact that YA having on-page sex scenes is not the pearl-clutching issue you think it is. It's made for teens who, newsflash, sometimes have sex. There's nothing wrong with it. Even more, I find it important that teens have access to these stories where other teens like them are wading through the intricacies of coming of age moments. As a huge YA supporter, parentheses, middle and high school English teacher, I have a problem with adult writing these books off as inappropriate." Now, this person recently followed up again in light of the Sibylline controversy and essentially said that yes, Sibylline is gross, but that on-page sex scenes in YA literature is still okay. And as an adult that primarily reads YA, I'd like to throw in my 2 cents. So as this person mentioned, yes, it is ignorant and quite frankly naive to assume that teenagers aren't engaging in sexual activity. However, I don't think that's a good enough reason to depict teenagers having explicit sexual encounters in books. When it comes to this kind of subject material, I think there's a way to have an age-appropriate conversation about sex. Things like asking for consent, discussing birth control options, and engaging in conversations about sexual health are all age-appropriate topics. And arguably, I think it's what should be the focus for this age demographic. But that's not what we're getting from the scenes in Sibylline. Yes, there are scenes where the characters are asking for consent before they do things like kiss or go further, but in the scene I just mentioned, Atticus is dead. You know who can't consent? A dead body. He wakes up to the sensation of his clothes being taken off. He wakes up to the sensation of hands touching him. He gives his consent retroactively because it's only when he comes back to his senses that he's an active participant, which is not the kind of productive conversation you want to be having with teens about sex, especially about consent. On top of that, there is no mention of protection, sexual health, or anything of that nature in this book. For reference, in the Maple Hill series, an adult romance collection that does have explicit scenes, before the characters do anything, it is common for their on-page dialogue to have discussions about STDs, about protection, and boundaries before they get anywhere near sexual activity. You mean to tell me that this book couldn't have done the same thing? As a lot of people have pointed out, yeah, teenagers are gonna do what teenagers do. And that's why it's important that we expose them to these kinds of conversations so that they're comfortable talking about their sexual wellness and being responsible for it. I hate the rationale of like, oh, it's just real and authentic and therefore you have to accept it. No, I don't. And yeah, I can know in my heart of hearts that they engage in this kind of activity. I don't need to read it, nor do I think that they need to read about it. At least not in this way that is so obviously just meant to be sexual gratification. Like TLC is going viral for their show Unexpected because a lot of the kids on that show are literal children. Like they're 12 and 13 years old and everyone is rightfully being like, why would you put that on TV? Why would you put that on the internet? But that's real and authentic, right? Because yeah, Kids are having kids, but people are in an outrage over that show, and rightfully so. Because yeah, we might know that that happens. We might know that this is an unfortunate reality for preteens in America, but we shouldn't concern ourselves with showing it. Instead, as a society, our goal should be to try to prevent it. Almost like if we had more age-appropriate conversations about consent, safe sex, and sexual wellness, maybe those things wouldn't happen. You see how it goes full circle? You see how depicting young people having sex doesn't actually do anything for them besides provide gratification? You see how there's like a more productive way to have that conversation and discuss sex without just making straight up porn? I know that you, my lovely viewer and hopefully subscriber of this channel, know what I'm talking about. I know you agree with me because you understand things. I don't know why I'm having to explain this on the internet. This seems very self-explanatory. You have to understand that the YA genre isn't just about the age demographic that it's aimed at. The genre also covers topics that apply to that demographic, themes of identity, transition, coming of age. And while yes, having serious conversations about how sex plays into the pressures of adolescence, it's wildly different than just straight up sex scenes. There's a reason that you have to be over the age of 18 to consume this kind of explicit content. It's not because of morality policing, it's not pearl clutchers. It's because while we understand that teenagers will inevitably make their own decisions, our job as a society is to help guide them to make informed choices so that when they go into adulthood and are exposed to this kind of material, they know how to navigate it. And personally, I fear that because these books are starting to get more mature, it might have a negative impact on the younger end of that spectrum. Personally, again, I don't know if anyone really agrees with me, this is just my take on the issue. I fear that the 13 and 14-year-olds might start to feel pressured into engaging in some of these more intimate acts in order to gain maturity. I fear that they might internalize the idea of being a late bloomer in order to be seen as this idealized and more mature version of themselves. They might feel inclined into engaging in some of this activity, even if they're not necessarily ready for it. We all know that adolescence is such a hard time in your life to navigate. You are literally in an identity crisis for your entire teenage years. That's why there's such a stress on having productive and age-appropriate conversations about sex. Because we understand that the demographic that these books are meant for are in such a vulnerable state of their life. They need that guidance, even if it's coming from a book that's meant to entertain them. That's why personally, in my opinion, I think that there's infinitely more value in having these productive conversations as opposed to just showing straight up sex. But to sum up my thoughts, I'm just gonna say that there is no world in which it's not weird to say that you write explicit sexual content about teenagers and for teenagers. You know, having smut in a YA book is already pretty bad, but while we're here, why don't we talk about the actual book? Yeah, because the plot and world building is not great either. I will admit that part of the difficulty I had with reading this book is that I didn't do it all in one sitting. I was constantly picking it up and putting it down over the course of like a week. A lot of my details are pretty scattered and I wasn't able to remember a lot of the details from it. But by far, the thing that pissed me off the most about this book is ironically the entire plot. So spoiler, by the end of the book you realize that the reason Raven, Atticus, and Dorian were not accepted into Sibylline is because they're too powerful. So basically, back in the day, the witch that the evil villain of this book, Professor White, brought back from the dead, she was super powerful. And when the school executed her, they were like, we can't let this ever happen again. We can't allow any powerful students into the school or anyone with telepathic abilities. Because I guess Adelina, the witch that died, had telepathic abilities. I don't know. But it's really funny to me because they try to drop hints throughout the book that the actual students of Sibylline aren't very powerful, and it just comes across as our main characters being so obnoxiously pretentious. There's a scene where Raven, Dorian, and Atticus are sitting in on a lecture where the students are trying to turn a rose into ash or something, and the students are all struggling to do it. And our main characters are like, oh my god, how are they struggling to do this? Like, they're literally Sibylline students, which I think is really bold considering they got in and you didn't. Like, I'm sorry, I was actively rooting against most of these characters throughout the book, specifically Raven. She was just so full of herself, hated it throughout the book. Let me explain. There's a moment in the book where Raven is practicing a spell that she learned from a book that she stole. The spell was supposed to light a candle, but when she did it, she literally summons lightning and burns down her apartment. Not only does she burn down her apartment, she burned Dorian's arm. And then the chapters afterward, when he's getting treated at the hospital, he's like, Raven doesn't really seem that concerned with the fact that she literally burned me. And frequently he notes that she sounds like a little excited about it. Like she's like, oh my God, Dorian, like, how's your arm? Like, I can't believe I burned it. Like, I can't believe I burned it. Girl, like that is the least of your concerns right now. You literally disfigured this man that you supposedly love, and she's more preoccupied with the idea that she had the power to do it. Like that's fucked up. I really thought the twist of this book was going to be that she's the villain because she frequently was getting them into like the worst situations possible. In another instance, Raven, Dorian, and Atticus all discover the bones of Adelina, the witch that died, and they're freaked out. They're like, okay, something's going on here. We gotta go. And Raven's like, why? It's just bones. It's just the remnants of a dead body. Like, what's the worst thing that can happen? It can't hurt us. I don't know, Raven, dipshit. Maybe the thing that killed her is still here. Atticus and Dorian are fine, I guess. I think they are better in comparison. I just really do not like Raven. Nothing about her character is in any way redeeming because she's also rich. Like she's also a stupid, spoiled rich girl that when she gets fired from her job, she complains and she's like, oh my God, now I have to go to Paris to take my gap year because I don't actually have to work because my parents subsidize my lifestyle. They pay for everything. Ooh, I don't know where all that anger came from. It wasn't even in my notes. I just like, that was all off the dome. I'm sorry. Back to my point. Raven catastrophically messes up this spell, and her immediate instinct is to say, oh my God, I'm so powerful, and not, I'm an untrained magician that fucked up this spell. Like the idea that they simply were untrained and didn't actually know how to use their powers, that thought never occurred to them. They immediately jumped to, we're better than everyone. Like that was such a stretch. I could not abandon my disbelief for that. I really thought that they were just delusional. Anytime they successfully casted a spell, I just thought to myself like, this is a deus ex machina. Like this is just too convenient. They have plot armor. This is not actually any kind of skill that they have. It's just for the sake of the plot. In general, the whole idea of like, let's sneak into the school and learn magic by joining the faculty was not great for me. It was really hard to abandon my disbelief. And I did it because I'm like, that's the whole point of the book. I kind of have to be okay with that in order to read it. That was already a really big stretch for me. So like at conception, I was struggling with this book, especially when we get the warden's explanation at the end. Basically, the warden, the principal of this school, he was like, I knew something was going down on these school grounds. I knew that one of my professors was secretly betraying me in order to bring back this witch from the dead and bring catastrophe to Sibylline. He was like, I couldn't investigate them on my own, so I knew I had to have help. So when you three applied, I had to reject you because you were just too powerful. But when you applied as staff, I knew I could bring you on so you can help me solve the mystery. That was fucking ridiculous because he never talks to them throughout the entire book. They never work together. He is just ominously in the background as a villain, and part of the plot twist is that the book makes you think that he's the bad guy and secretly he's not. But I'm like, that's such a stupid bullshit reason. There is no way that you hired them to help you and then never spoke to them. How would you know if they were actually making any progress on the investigation? How would you know if they were actually uncovering the mystery if you don't talk to them? And lastly, like just really small detail, they fucked him back to life? What do you mean? What do you mean? I don't understand that plot point. I don't understand why it needed to happen. Already I was mad that they freed him and exorcised him using the power of friendship or whatever. But then you also bring him back to life by riding him. A terrible use of free will, if I might say. Overall, Sibylline is not my favorite. Quite frankly, the book is weird as hell. Not only did I not like the plot or the world building, but yeah, the explicit sex scenes are definitely not a good inclusion. If the Goodreads reviews are anything to go off of, I don't think it was well received. I don't think it's a matter of that we're just not ready to have sex scenes in YA. I don't think they belong in YA. Like, if we're gonna say that teenagers are gonna use their free will regardless of what we say, then why don't we just let them exercise it to its fullest extent and have them get that content in adult literature? Like, you see how it goes both ways. You see how it's a slippery slope. You see how, like, we could also just not have that kind of content in YA and the world goes on spinning. The last thing I want to say is that while I do think it was a miss to have a book about teenagers having sexual relations in this way, I think it's also definitely a miss on the publisher's end. They should not have categorized this as YA. In any world, they should not. Most of the blame goes to the publisher. Like, they know better. So while I think the book could have been rewritten so that it was aged up for an adult audience, I also think that the publisher could have just said, hey, this is clearly not YA, age them up, or we'll just make it adult. The blame goes both ways, but I will say that I haven't really read a lot of other books from this author. I don't know if this was just like a one-off, just one bad choice, but I will extend the benefit of the doubt. I think this was definitely a miss, but I think based on the reception, it probably won't happen again. At least we're hoping. Right? Anyway, I would give this book a 0 out of 5 stars. I genuinely didn't like it. I actually didn't know how angry I was about the book until I sat down to talk about it. I genuinely kind of blacked out for a second. Like, I really went off script. I don't even know how long I've been talking. But anyway, that's the end of my video. Let me know what you think down in the comments. If you've read Sibylline, if you've heard about the controversy, what do you think? Is there a world in which YA books can have this kind of explicit content? Is there a way people should be going about it? Let me know down in the comments below. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe if you haven't already. And of course, you can find me on my other social media platforms at Listen to Kristen on TikTok, Instagram, and Goodreads. Anyway, that's the end of my video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Don't worry, next time I'm going to review a book positively. I'm really going to try. We'll see how I do. Thank you.